Good afternoon.
今天有机会来到
I'm very pleased to come here to the National Congress of Brazil and meet old friends. On behalf of the Chinese government and people, the cordial greetings and best wishes to the hospitable and friendly Brazilian people and to all the people in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Brazil deserves a lot more attention than it typically gets in Western discourse.
We're worried about what's happening all over the world, except in our own backyard.
China-Brazil relations and China-Latin America relations keep moving forward like the Yangtze River and the Amazon River.
It's really striking the amount of control that China already has.
A China não está comprando no Brasil, ela está comprando o Brasil.
They know what they want from Brazil. They know how Brazil can play a role in their rise.
We're being leveraged, we're being encircled. We're going to wake up one day and we're going to be very, very surprised and very upset. And then people are going to ask, how did this happen? And the answer is we let it happen.
Yeah, I have seen this many times. I'm kind of obsessed with it as a piece of like sort of hacky but sort of really smooth, like incredibly creepy propaganda.
Yeah, I came in at the end of Jandra World talking about imperialism, and I have been thinking a lot about, all the talk of multipolar world thesis, because everyone can't shut up about it lately, and they tend to get it from a bad source. I mean, we can hope that they got it from Fareed Zakaria, but we know they probably got it from someone trying to popularize Alexander Dugin. But if you actually go back and read what those two are referencing, the beginning of the 20th century political economy, early realism, early geopolitical realism kind of assumes that there are multiple hegemons and that you want your hegemon to be far away from you. So you have an incentive to see whatever big power is far away to be actually more conducive to you, regardless of imperialism, because you need to be connected in their trade networks. And if you have to lose some sovereignty to do that, that's totally worth it for your gains in capital access. But what you don't want is that sovereign to be right next door. So if you're Bolivia, China makes sense. If you're Vietnam, believe it or not, even an old enemy like the United States makes more sense. And that's kind of predictive of what we're seeing right now. What I find interesting about this, though, is like these motherfuckers want their Cold War back. So every time Tucker Carlson can have a chance to make China seem like it's encircling us, while also trying to make it look like Russia is not a concern. And I agree that the current liberal fear of Russia is vastly overstated. I think Ben and I have talked about that on other places. But it just seems weird that you would somehow see China as really, really a threat, but Russia as completely not a threat, right, when they are when we're all part of an integrated system that is beginning to as Peter Zion, a kind of conservative commentator, but one that I have found useful in understanding the current situation, is globalization and that phase of neoliberalism is ending. And so we are seeing a renationalization of parts of the economy, but no one really is in the space to completely decouple, and that's kind of why we're in this weird, precarious world right now where China's trying to both, stand up to the West, but also not stand up too much, but it's got to back up Russia, but Russia's totally, exploded its Belt and Road Initiative effectively and accelerated a bunch of problems there that probably would have come up eventually anyway. It's made the dollar stronger. It's forced China to play a reserve currency status before it felt like it was ready. you see all these things happening, and all that Tucker Carlson can do is like, well, China's going to Brazil, and I guess we need to support Bolsonaro or whatever. And it sort of makes sense. But what do you guys make of this? I heard the ends of Jay Andrew talking, but I don't know Jake, and I haven't heard Ben's take.
Jake, you have any thoughts?
No, man, you got to go for this.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, what really hits me about this, just to take a step back from the geopolitics a second, just to do the, just do the rhetoric, is that it is this kind of like Russian nesting doll of evil shit, because like on the most obvious level, like what is he, why is Tucker Carlson promoting this narrative about Brazil? I don't, like, does Tucker think he can, influence the Brazilian election, or is it, as I kind of suspect, that we just hired Jake for his looks. Is it that he's basically priming his audience to support a coup if that happens in Brazil, which is still a real possibility. I mean, I remember, when I was talking, not to put too fine a point on it, and I'm not going to like start some big thing about this, but it is very weird to reflect on the fact there's somebody who has a line in that video who's been on the show. But in any case, when I was talking to that person, he told me that, the right-wing paramilitaries in Brazil, which like, I think a lot of people maybe don't have a good idea when they hear that phrase, like, we're not talking about like the fucking Proud Boys here with like, 200 people when they get them all together, throughout the entire country. And, most of them aren't willing to actually, fire a gun in anger. We're talking about paramilitaries that like control territory in the same way that like drug gangs do. And, these are the people who assassinated Marielle Franco, right? The socialist politician in Brazil. And what he told me during that conversation was that a lot of those people look at like January 6th in the U.S. and they kind of make fun of it because those guys weren't serious, right? That if they did it, they would be doing it for real. And so if that happens, I mean, if Lula wins the second round of the vote, which currently looks very likely, and there is some kind of violent right-wing response, possibly involving elements of the military. What the military would do in this situation is a big question mark, as I understand it, right? From what I've heard from people who know much more about Brazil than I do. Then Tucker wants his audience to side with them, right? That he wants like politicians he might have influence over to side with them against against democracy in Brazil. So that's the most obvious level. Well, I mean, in some ways that's the most immediate point, right? But then, next layer of nested dolls in, right? I mean, like, it's what Varn said earlier, that he wants, he wants to have a new Cold War, that I guess it's not, I mean, the fact that we're already, teetering on the brink of like global catastrophe with Russia isn't good enough, right? We got to heat up a Cold War with China too, while we're at it, right? So that's pretty evil. And then like, again, just on a rhetorical level, like, this could not be a cruder, like, anti-Asian kind of imagery. There's literally an image in that preview that's like, you still hear the communists chanting, and there's the ominous chords going on in the background. And the image is literally a dragon with its fangs out. And it says China Takeover. I mean, like, it lacked nothing but like a gong sound effect or something. This is like 1930s Yellow Peril propaganda.
I had the gong in my head, by the way.
Yeah, it's something else. I also love that Marco Rubio's like gearing up for some more Monroe Doctrine. When the coup happens, because we have to control what's in our backyard, according to Monroe.
Yeah, because that's the line that we're going to be encircled, which is I guess it's kind of the Red Dawn theory, right? That like the Red Dawn, the original, not the remake, was it was like Cubans and Nicaraguans who were spearheading the invasion of the United States, which never made very much sense.
No, but the remake makes less sense because it was North Korea.
Yeah, sure. I'd have even less idea how that would happen, but whatever.
It's certainly fun to watch, though.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I just, but like it is, like the whole thing is pretty astonishing, and and I agree. Like, I mean, I agree with what I think both you and Varn are saying about about China. We can mentally walk and chew bubblegum on this, right? I mean, you can both think that it's ridiculous to think that like China is in, I don't know, some grave danger of taking over a bunch of nations that encircle the U.S., which, by the way, taking the circling literally, I guess also Canada. But
yeah, which they really don't have much power, because Canada, believe it or not, is the largest resource extractor in the world. As like 60% of their foreign industry is people who run resource extraction.
Yeah, they're the largest carbon producer per capita too now. They've actually, I mean, they have a significantly smaller population, so in absolute numbers, they're still nothing compared to the United States. But per capita, they're higher than us because of that extractive economy.
But they also do it around the world too. Like a lot of these companies that are export, that are drilling these things up are either Canadian or Chinese.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of competition there. One of the things that I would, imperialism in the Marxist sense. I know I'm going to sound like a pedant here,
sure,
but there's like 4 different theories as to what it is, and people kind of they treat it like the way they treat God. By that I mean like they don't think about the fact they're moving between definitions kind of arbitrarily when they talk about it, and so I actually am somewhat more hesitant to say China is imperialist, and not because I don't think it isn't, because I think under one definition it clearly is. It is trying to gain advantage in the international market. It's trying to do so without gunboat diplomacy or colonialism, but it is definitely doing so at its own advantage. It is not doing so in terms of pure debt traps, but as we've seen with the limitations of the Belt and Road Initiative, it's had to basically become its own IMF, and the way that it forgives defaulting loans.
I should say, just to be accurate about this, I think at least for now, a much gentler version.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what I would say about that, I mean, they just didn't want to be in the IMF period at all, because forgiving the loans in that situation creates a power imbalance that they sincerely did not want to do. Plus, there's domestic and regional disputes in China about how generous the Belt and Road should be. Xi's particular instantiation of it is basically the Marshall Plan on crack. I think it's something like 12 times the cost adjusted for inflation, and like 70 times. If they had done what they wanted to do, 72 times the economic production that could have come out of it, it would have created 2 globalized trade systems, the blue water one, which would be dominated by us as we inherited it from the British, and then they would have one basically that's shallow water and land, but that isn't going to happen now. I mean, the Ukraine,
which is sad, because I love those songs. Like they put out like 5 or 6 different songs as like propaganda, and they kind of slap. I'm just like, damn, like I'm all for this Belt and Road now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say, look, is where I think you can walk and chew bubblegum is look, do I think that do I think we're going to be encircled by Chinese control,
Absolutely not.
Latin America and Chinese Canada? No. You know, there's a nice line in Christopher Hitchens, one of his debates with his brother Peter, you know, his extremely conservative brother Peter, where you know, Hitchens has some fun with, Christopher has some fun with, says, look, there are things I worry about and there are things I don't worry about. I'm never going to lose. Here's a list of things I'm never going to lose sleep about. That the Tory party isn't insane enough, that the Church of England isn't ridiculous enough, etc. And so in that same spirit, right, there's, on the list of things that I don't worry about, this scenario is definitely one of them. So you can say that, but you could also say you don't have to then go to the other pole of saying that like China is like, I don't know, like doing, is like when China gives out loans and stuff, it's like doing socialist internationalism. I mean, you said, no, I mean, like clearly they're a major power that is interested in pursuing its own interests and throwing around influence and all that stuff. I mean, that's all true, right? Like you can, you don't have to make these weird, in general, I think, even putting aside the imperialism issue, I think in general on China, there's a lot of weird, like, there are a lot of like left debates about it that sort of, either have to do with like accepting one or another of like sort of extreme views that don't necessarily make a lot of sense, that either it's like an egalitarian socialist society, which it's obviously not, right? And there's nothing like objectionably or worryingly authoritarian about it, or else it's like there's absolutely no difference between the way that like the Chinese economy works and the way that like the American economy works, right? That's like I think you can, I think. I don't know. I don't know what it is about China as a subject that that makes people makes people incapable of nuance. I think they just get too excited about it somehow. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all silly. Now, as to whether it's imperialism or not imperialism or whatever, I think that it depends. It depends what you mean. There's the sort of I think that I also think I've always also long thought, I shouldn't say always, because I guess there's a point where I would have just assumed that whatever Lenin says about this must be correct, but I also think that there's a lot about how we use the I think that imperialism is like a useful shorthand for certain things that like are worth talking about and are always worth saying a paragraph about when you talk about them. So I don't think it's necessarily a crime to use it in a, oh, you know what I mean way sometimes, but like, but I don't know. It's the sort of like insisting that imperialism only means like whatever like Bukharin or Lenin meant by it in the late 19 teens just strikes me as weird. Right. And it's like also like I think doesn't really capture what most people mean.
Right. I found the whole insistence that imperialism as described in the imperialism, the highest phase of capitalism, and that is the highest phase of capitalism because Lenin said so in a pamphlet that was that was trying to combine two different positions in the Bolsheviks into one coherent theory is kind of funny considering World War II happened. And after World War II, conditions look a lot more like what's actually described by Kautsky. And I mean, I think Kautsky's description of colonialism is terrible. But, people, our history is full of people who are half right. Like, and that's fine. We don't have to argue from holy writ all the time. And even people who really want to say Lenin's imperialism, I think like John Smith, you see in their books, like they have had to refine the definition to talk about how it might work. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't expect people on the internet to be like, on Twitter to be like, see subcategory D about like which version of imperialism I mean, because I'm not a weird analytic philosopher. That's Ben's job. But, in some sense, though, it is true when we're doing analysis, we do have to clarify that. Like, I don't. The reason why I bring it up is I just don't want people to think, oh, it's the same as what the United States did post 1950, because it's not. But there are ways that it's analogous to what the United States did in the 19th century. Does that mean it's going to be the same way? No, they're not. They're definitely not as interested in gunboat diplomacy. Like, they're just not. They would have been building a much larger blue water navy if that's what they were trying to do. So
and I mean, also just the history of China, before like if you watch as much Chinese media as I do, which is a lot, they're kind of obsessed with the period of where Japan takes over, and because like that was like this big like solidarity moment of like, we must come together and must overcome this common enemy. And so a lot of times they'll do something about that, but be talking about like very modern issues. And I don't think at the way China is right now that they're going to go forward to like any type of American occupational type of imperialism. We're going to see something very uniquely Chinese that's working with those local governments, but also, exporting those, the natural resources to China.
Yeah. Although I would say maybe we should. I mean, the other thing I would say about the weird narrative we get from both liberals and conservatives in America on China is that it's like the super beast, which can destroy us all and is way more efficient. And sometimes you see leftists basically like inverting that. Oh, well, it must be true, and that's a good thing. Having spent some time in China, it's a very interesting society, but it's not one like the difference between the urban and the rural poor has really only started to being addressed again since like 2012. I mean, that's actually one of the things that has caused Xi's popularity in China, is that he has like focused on undoing some of the dingest reforms without officially undoing them, and reinvesting some stuff back into the countryside and anti-poverty programs. Whereas like in the 1980s and 90s in China, despite the whole dingus miracle asterisks, life expectancy in China actually stalled because of the decline in life expectancy in the countryside. So like when I hear most Americans talk about this, it's like I literally feel like they have like what CNN or Fox will tell you, and it leads to a very schizophrenic, because on one hand, you've been told for a long time that once China hits less than 10% growth, it's going to fall apart overnight. Well, it's been less than 10% growth since like 2011. And on the other hand, and that it has a major demographic crisis coming, which it does, but pretty much everybody does. Asterisk ? If it's actually bad. But on the other hand, you have this, they're encircling us, they're going to take everything, they're going to dominate us in the future. And it's very interesting to me, even from our pop cultural narratives, because from like, let's say you just go back to before Josh Whedon we knew how cancelable he was, and we go back and watch Firefly, and the assumption is that the US, that like there'd be a hybrid culture that is like US Chinese, because of the growth, the slight decline of the US and the growth of China was inevitable. And that since we were so markedly interconnected, we would have to interconnect our cultures eventually and start having to take Chinese influence, which is, and actually in some ways true. I mean, like our superhero movies are partially made for Chinese markets, and that's why they're kind of, culturally decontextualized, etc.
And boring.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure that Chinese movies were increasingly, you would particularly 10 years ago thought they were going to be more and more marketed for us. They were trying to. I think current economic conditions have changed all that.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron exclusive post games on Monday nights, all of the patron exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.